Welcome everybody to the Europe Talk Solidarity webinar series. We are still admitting people as they come, so we are so happy to see so many people here. My name is Tali Padan, and I will be facilitating today's webinar along with Elizabeth Einwanger, who's doing the background show. And before I start to introduce what we're going to be doing in today's webinar, I would first like to welcome and introduce the organizer, one of the organizers of this series, webinar series, who is Miguel Tabera, who is from Europe Solidarity Corps. So please, Miguel.
Thank you, Tali. Yeah, in the name of SALTO Research Center European Solidarity Corps, I would like to welcome all of you. Yeah, welcome to the EuroTalk Solidarity webinar for our edition 25. So it is really fantastic to have all of you around here. And it is important to mention this will be the fourth year in a row that we are running these webinars. And each year we choose a new topic. Yeah. And for this year, we decide to focus a little bit, or a little bit more than a bit, in the intersection between solidarity, democracy, and climate justice. You have to understand climate justice might not be our usual thing to work in the resource center. However, we find that it's an important topic, and Eurotalk Solidarity is the space that we go not only in the context of the European Solidarity Corps program, but in the context of solidarity as such as a value. So therefore, we decide to talk about this year. This year is also a little bit different as the prior years because we had normally our webinars in 1 month, in December. December is the month of solidarity. And this year we decided to do it a little bit more divided. So we have one in October, one in November, and one in December. So it's the first time we're doing like this, and we are looking forward to see how many people are coming and what is going to happen. I would like also to take a little moment to thank the facilitation team, my other colleagues of the other Saltos that are present here, and I'm really happy to be here. So I'm really looking forward for the discussion, that you get something from this. And without further ado, I would say I give you the word, Tali. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. And yes, so as Miguel said, we are taking up the topic of climate justice, which actually drew a lot of interest. We already have a lot of people on the call and more coming, because it is a topic that's very relevant and pressing, and not the easiest topic to cover because it's at the intersection of many different fields, and it is a topic that requires some attention and not necessarily a comfortable attention because it has to do with inequality and injustice as well. So what we are doing for this first webinar is taking up this topic from a few different perspectives. We're going to hear from the research perspective, in the sense it's actually practice-based research, from the policy perspective, and from two projects that have been kind of engaged in this topic, or the topic of climate change. So we would like to also welcome the audience to interact and use the chat. That is, you can write comments as you hear them. You know, some people, when we're in a group together, when we're in a circle, we can see people like nodding and agreeing and not agreeing, but we can't see that here. So you feel free, even just emoticons or anything you feel that you just want to share. The chat can be your space. Also questions. So how we're going to do this is we're going to have the four speakers, one after the other, with no time for questions in between. But at the end, we will leave, hopefully we'll have 20-25 minutes to ask them some questions from you. We've already gotten some really great questions from the registration, so we have those in mind. But please do ask them. If you submitted a question, please ask it again on this chat so we have a kind of fresh perspective. And I think that would be that's the structure, that's the info you need from my side. And to start us off, we are going to hear from Mary Ann Manahan, who's a doctoral assistant at the Conflict Research Group at the Department of Conflict and Development Studies at Ghent University in Belgium. And she will tell you about climate justice, climate injustice, who it affects, and she will give us much more information about the topic to begin with. So Mary Ann, if you're ready, you can unmute and go for it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tali, for that introduction. And hello, everyone. And thank you for being here. And I also would like to thank Salto for the invitation. I'm delighted to join you in this webinar. It's my first time. And as Tali mentioned, my presentation aims to give you an overview of climate justice and injustice. And today I'll be talking about three things. First, the origins and principles of climate justice. Second is the examples of struggles for climate justice from frontline communities around the world. And third, what are the lessons we can draw for building fair and effective climate action, including what this means for solidarity work here in Europe. I just would like to check with Elizabeth if she can share my presentation. Yeah. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Yeah, next, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. But before I delve into the three aspects, let's talk about the context first. We know from climate science that we are already crossing into dangerous territory. In 2024, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres put it very bluntly. To keep the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit alive, global emissions would need to fall by 9% every year until 2030. But according to him and many scientists, instead, emissions are still rising. So this means the window for action is very small, and the consequences of climate crisis and the climate breakdown are already here, from extreme droughts, floods, and storms to entire cities and coasts at risk of being submerged. Next, please. Next slide, please. But climate change is not only, can you go back a little bit? Yeah, one slide before. Yeah. Yeah, no, one slide back, two slides back. Yes. Sorry. I think it's slide 4. Yes, yes, that slide, yes. But climate change is not only an environmental problem. The IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that provides policymakers with regular scientific assessments on climate change, describes it as a threat multiplier. That means it worsens existing inequality, problems of poverty, hunger, displacement, health risks, etc. And here is the injustice. Those who are most responsible for emissions, such as wealthy nations and elites, will likely not suffer the worst impacts. Meanwhile, those who contributed the least, such as farmers, indigenous peoples, workers, poor communities in the global south, are among the most exposed. So from the beginning, climate change has always been about inequality. Next, please. Climate justice is often thought as a new phenomenon, but it has a longer genealogy dating from the 1970s, for example, with Black, Indigenous, and labor unions in North America and forest-based communities in Asia and Latin America, struggling and exposing the health impacts and environmental racism and displacement caused by toxic polluting industries, deforestation, dam building by governments and corporations. In academic literature, this is often called as the environmentalism of the poor or grassroots environmentalism. But climate justice as a movement, as a concept, really took off in the late 1980s and early 1990s when global South voices challenged the idea that all countries are equally responsible for global warming. In fact, a very important landmark 1991 report by Indian scholars Anil Agarwal and Sunita Narain, Global Warming in an Unequal World, introduced the distinction between survival emissions, which are produced by poor communities meeting basic needs, and on the other hand, luxury emissions, which are linked to excessive high consumption lifestyle of the wealthy. So this framing and distinction expose the injustice of blaming the global south for a crisis that is driven largely by industrialized countries and elites. And over time, as this slide shows you, climate justice grew into a rallying call for social movements, combining human rights, ecological justice, systemic critiques of capitalism and colonialism. And in the last, particularly 10 years, in 2015, climate justice, for instance, was included as a principle in the preamble of the Paris Agreement. And in the last 5 years, a global justice movement coming from the youth sectors around the world, such as the Fridays for Future and Extinction Rebellion, launched strikes against the political inaction of governments to address global warming. Next slide, please. Next slide. So this is where the framework of climate justice comes in. And it's very important to take a look at the many elements that climate justice is for grounding. First, the root causes. The crisis is not an accident of nature. It is linked to an economic model built on fossil fuels, extractivism, capitalism, and colonialism. Second, it emphasizes the unequal impacts that climate disasters hit people differently, depending on their class, geography, race, gender, disability, ethnicity, and other structural factors. And third, the importance of historical responsibility. And I would like to emphasize here that for climate justice as a framework, it centers that some countries and corporations have really benefited for centuries from fossil fuel-based development. And that means they owe a climate debt and must do more. Fourth, climate justice also emphasizes the limit of conventional responses. Many political or market-based responses, such as carbon trading or technological fixes, really don't address the root causes of the climate breakdown, but in fact create new problems. And finally, the importance of systemic solutions that are already coming from frontline communities that are living in a just and sustainable ways of living. Next slide, please. This is just to reiterate some of the earlier points that I made, and to put it simply, what climate justice asks us is not just about how we cut emissions, but also who acts, who benefits, and who pays the price. Next slide, please. Next slide. In this section of my presentation, I would like to outline maybe 3 campaigns that emphasizes climate justice. First is the campaigns against fossil fuels and extraction. A global rallying call by many communities and transnational campaigns is a nice slogan and very rhythmic, no? To leave the oil in the soil, the tar sand in the land, the coal in the hole. And one of the leading voices here is a transnational group called Oil Watch, which have exposed as early as the 1980s the link between global warming, oil extraction, the plunder of nature, as well as the violence and impoverishment that it causes against resource-rich communities. So many communities around the world have conducted bold direct actions, such as blockades to hold the construction of coal-fired power plants, major oil and gas pipelines, but also at the same time, these same frontline communities are involved in restoration and rehabilitation in their territories and landscape. Next, please. To give you a concrete example, I just would like to give the case of the extraction in the Niger Delta in Nigeria, where oil was discovered in 1958. And since then, Shell and other oil companies, in collusion, of course, with the Nigerian state, have extracted billions in wealth, while local communities face pollution, violence, and poverty. So for more than 6 decades, oil extraction in the Niger Delta has been an iconic example of how human misery and ecocide go hand in hand. Next slide, please. Activists like Ken Saro-Wiwa, who was executed in 1995, and many others have led resistance struggles. And this slide shows you the long history of resistance movements against Shell's ecological warfare. There has been some legal victories that I think is worth mentioning because it involves transnational solidarity. In a 2021 ruling, a Dutch appeals court found Shell Nigeria liable for oil spills in the Niger Delta and ordered its parent company, the Royal Dutch Shell, to implement a leak detection system to prevent future spills. So this landmark decision, which followed a 13-year legal battle that was brought by Nigerian farmers as well as Friends of the Earth in the Netherlands, was really a significant victory for challenging corporate impunity and exacting accountability. Next slide, please. And today, women like, for example, Martha Agbani are leading restoration efforts. Her group, for instance, has planted a tremendous amount of 1.3 million mangrove trees that combines ecosystem restoration, women's empowerment, and livelihoods in Ogoni land. And this is despite tremendous challenges that is linked to contamination of the soil and lack of cleanup by Shell. So what this emphasizes is really a story of resistance and renewal. I just would like to emphasize and encourage you, for example, to look at the work of my colleague Amina Adebisi of Odofin, who has been working on this issue. So lesson number one from this struggle against extractivism and fossil fuel. Frontline communities are not passive victims. They are agents of both resistance and restoration. Next slide, please. The second set of struggles that I want to share is about false solution. False solutions are basically policies and practices that really look good on paper, but they really do not solve the root causes of the climate crisis, and in fact, often delay and worsen the problem. So I'll give a couple of examples. One is the carbon offsets and reducing emissions from forest degradation and deforestation, or REDD+. And there's a whole wide of body of literature, research and evidence that shows how these schemes commodify forests and allow polluters actually to keep polluting, while local communities lose their rights to the land and to their forests. Another example is the false solution that is generated by the recent race to decarbonize, the net zero race. Net zero just literally means that when the amount of greenhouse gases that people add to the atmosphere is equal to the amount that is being taken out. So this zero balance is achieved basically by reducing as much as possible and then removing any remaining unavoidable emissions through either methods like tree planting or using carbon capture technology. The goal is to stop adding to the total amount of these heat-trapping gases to help limit global warming. However, and this is where the rub is, many governments and corporations announce and pledge net zero targets. However, they still continue fossil fuel extraction and rely so much on unproven technologies and large-scale land grabs, which again worsen the problem than solving it. Next slide, please. This is just to show you some of the research that I've been involved in documenting this new trend. Next, please. So this leads to what activists call as green colonialism or energy colonialism, or in the words of Algerian activist researcher Hamza Hamouchene, green colonialism can be defined as the extension of the colonial relations of plunder and dispossession to the era of renewable energies, with accompanying displacement of socio-environmental costs onto peripheral countries and communities that prioritizes the energy needs of one region of the world over another. Next, please. So, in other words, green colonialism is reproduced when global south countries provide the critical raw minerals such as lithium, cobalt, nickel needed for energy transition, as well as for electric vehicle batteries, for example, and they bear the social environmental costs, while the global north consumers and governments produces and consumes clean technology, and unfortunately continues business as usual. So lesson number two, we must be wary of quick fixes that simply shifts the burden onto the most vulnerable. Next slide. And this is the last example of campaigns and struggles that I will share. There are alternatives. Around the world, communities are experimenting, for example, with eco-social transitions. So you have examples that highlight community power through either indigenous stewardship of forests, or through examples like food sovereignty movements like La Via Campesina, which is a global peasant movement that focuses on valuing food producers and localizing food systems. And you also have examples of locally owned, even corporate and owner and union-owned renewable energy systems. There are also movements such as the Trade Union for Energy Democracy that links climate action with labor rights, gender equality, and racial justice. And also, finally, global solidarity networks that build alliances across borders, either for the growth, for post-extractivist economies, and just futures. So here in these examples of initiatives and action that are built on climate justice, we have philosophies like Buen Vivir from Latin America, which centers on the idea of living in harmony with nature, as well as Ubuntu from Africa, which basically emphasizes the interconnectedness of humanity, our collective responsibility issues of principles and values of reciprocity and social justice that provide living examples of how to rethink development beyond growth and extraction. Next slide, please. This is just to show you a map of the different alternatives that are already being constructed around the world. Next slide, please. So, next slide. So in conclusion and to wrap up, what do this campaign about climate justice tell us? First, climate justice tackles the root causes. It shows that responsibility is specific, not only the general idea of humanity, but zeroes in on particular actors, corporations, and systems that have caused the climate crisis. Second, effective climate action must be rooted in justice, and without addressing, for example, inequality and historical responsibility, solutions will tend to fail. Third, the importance of solidarity and care are essential. So communities facing the worst impact show us that resilience is really built collectively. And finally, that systemic change is possible from below and that they need recognition, support, and solidarity. Finally, I think for the members of the European Solidarity Corps, what climate justice teaches us is that, again, climate action is not about only reducing carbon footprints. It's about listening to and learning from frontline struggles, acting in solidarity, and pushing for systematic changes that makes transition fair, democratic, and caring. But it's also about exacting accountability and demanding, for example, from the European governments and the US, for example, and powerful institutions like the EU, that they must take responsibility for historic emissions, pay for their climate debt, and stop exporting harm, and instead stand behind systemic, justice-centered alternatives that are led by communities on the front line. Next, please. Thank you very much for listening. Just to show you my contact if you want more information about our research on climate justice. I look forward to your questions and reflections.
Thank you, Mary Ann, for that really interesting and rich presentation. There was a lot in there, and I'm sure you're going to have questions at the end. Please also, if you have questions now, if you have reflections, you can feel free to put something in the chat. I'm not going to read them out right now, but just to get a few impressions before we move on to the next speaker. You can even put one word. I'm not going to call you out also. But thank you. That was very, very relevant and very good to hear. So we will move on. I see there's no reactions in the chat just yet. So we will move on to our next speaker. And this is an interesting combination because now we had a call from Marianne for the policymakers, and now we have someone from the policy side. From actually SALTO Green, which is a resource center that's dedicated to issues of sustainable development and the green transition. So that's Ana Luis, who will speak to us about how climate change intersects with the work of SALTO Green. So go ahead, Ana Luis. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Hello, everybody. Thank you as well for coming to this event. So my name is Anne-Louise Dupin, and I work with SALTO Green, so the equivalent of SALTO, but for the green priority, the green transition in the Erasmus Plus and European Solidarity Corps priority. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means within the program. So again, like more of an institutional view. And just to get started, a little, let's go over the reason why we're here and the problem that we're trying to solve, which is the risks that global change is making Europe face. European land is rising in temperature faster than the rest of the world. That doesn't mean we're going to have, as we discussed, the most impact, but we are even more concerned than other areas of the world. The regions near the pole heat up faster. In Svalbard, very high in Europe. We already see temperatures rising more than 3 degrees, which is quite catastrophic. And this rise in temperature, that means a lot of dramatic weather events for Europe. That is drought, flooding, heat waves, fires. They're becoming more frequent, they're intensifying, they're becoming more dramatic, and they're moving north. Here you have a picture of the dramatic floodings in 2024 in Valencia in Spain. About 200 people died due to, again, a dramatic flood. And wherever you are right now in the world or in Europe, I think you have in your recent memory some kind of event like this. Again, maybe it's a forest fire, maybe it's a flooding, maybe it's a dramatic heat wave in your city. But most, if not all, Europeans have experienced those kind of dramatic events recently. And this is obviously a huge problem for our quality of life and even for the preservation of human life, as we've seen. This is also a very economical problem. It costs a lot to handle those events. We estimate that just this 2025 summer weather with some heat waves and forest fires costs already 43 billion euros for the European Union. And the long-term impact, which is more dramatic, the impact on the cultures, on the reconstruction, on the equipment of the communities, is going to cost up to 126 billion by 2029. And I think this is a very important number to keep in mind the next time you hear a politician tell you that there is no money to finance the green transition. There is not enough money to not finance the green transition. So this is all connected to climate change. Also connected to climate change is the loss of biodiversity. It's also connected to artificialization, to pollution. But we know that the natural resources in Europe are being impacted. And natural resources, I mean the things that we can exploit, but also just the nature around us that benefits and protects us and just makes, again, our quality of life much more enjoyable. So these are all very bad points. I don't want to finish on too much eco-anxiety. So I'll just also point out that we are doing something about it in the European Union. We already are seeing the effects of all the work that they've been doing. We are decreasing the greenhouse gas emissions in the European Union. In 2023, we saw the highest net reduction in decades, not including COVID, but COVID doesn't really count, like 2020 doesn't really count. So that means it's working. And that means we have to keep pushing because unfortunately, there's a lot of calls at the politician level to stop the green transition, to go back on everything that we put in place. And well, personally, I think that would be really bad, but I know some politicians disagree with me. But anyway, the way we have obtained those results already, it's thanks to the European Green Deal in a good part. This is the investment plan from the European Union. That means we are changing regulation, but we're also putting a lot of money, again, into the green transition, into accompanying and mitigating the climate change and the transition that we have to face either way. These are a few of the objectives of the Green Deal: becoming climate neutral in 2050. So that means not emitting more greenhouse gases than what the European Union territory can reabsorb. Also, goal is to protect human life, but also animals and plants and biodiversity all over, again, the territory. There is a big economical aspect of making companies and workers leaders and innovators in the green transition and facing the new technologies, the new roles, the new works that are going to come with this. And the last one is to make sure that this transition that we are to face due to global change, global warming, is just and inclusive. For the European Green Deal, what it means is maybe not what we think about when we think about justice and inclusivity. For the European Green Deal, this means mostly fairness in terms of communities being affected by the transition, the economical transition. And so there are some mechanisms. Just transition is a mechanism to support communities that rely a lot on fossil fuels. So mining towns, for example, or countries or regions that are relying on airplanes or on cars to transport. That's also a big part of the Social Climate Fund. Also a mechanism to support communities, people, and even what they call micro businesses, so very small businesses, not even companies, but like a bakery, for example, or car repair shop that are impacted by regulations on buildings or on transportation. Again, knowing that the poor population that want to transition might not have all the resources to do so. And so taking part of this budget to help the most vulnerable and the most impacted communities. And another way that the European Green Deal is being put in place is through the Erasmus Plus and European Solidarity Corps programs through the Green Priority. which I represent. In the official term is the Environment and Fight Against Climate Change Priority. And it's declared, presented a little bit in different ways throughout the programs, depending on the sectors. But mostly it's the idea of raising awareness of the climate change and on topic connected to ecology, and also actioning some behaviors, changing some cultures, changing some ways the activities are implemented to fit the new reality of, again, the green transition. Specifically in the program for the youth sector, we talk about making learners, staff, and youth workers actors of change, which is very interesting and again fits a lot with the thinking about including people into the green transition and giving them decision power. And this is something that is even more present in the ESC program, because there is really a talk about making participants of the ESC able to be active. I think, yeah, this is environmental active is the term, to be able to make a difference in their life. And I think this is the most clear and most related definition, the closest to the climate justice topic. In other sectors, vocational education, for example, or higher education, the terms are a bit more vague, and it's mostly about raising awareness, sharing knowledge, and sharing some skills, sometimes toward future job prospects. But in ESC, it's very, very clear that there's an idea of European people being, as volunteers, active, being able to make decisions, being able to join the green transition as actors and deciders, and just not following along to what's being decided for them. And this is very interesting and show that ESC and the youth program have kind of this more specific role to play for the green priority in the programs. Another mechanism, one big mechanism that Erasmus and ESC programs put in place for the green transition is the funding of the travel. Obviously, this is mobility programs. They're really, really focused on traveling. And so there is a sense of giving a bit more support for people to choose or to be able to take green travel, bike, train, bus, shared cars, and now boats. And that means also, and that's the first, part of taking into consideration inclusion, is offering more travel days and more extra support, financial support for people who are traveling, depending on their needs. And specifically, there is this idea of having extra money, basically extra support for people who have inclusion needs for traveling, because again, taking the train for a day and a half versus one plane ride, that brings a lot of different needs, and it's a bit more complicated than just switching your tickets. So this is one of the mechanisms of the programs to help all the projects and the participants do their green transition. Very briefly, another mechanism or lever of action that they have is SALTO Green, which I represent. The important notion here, the only thing, I think you already know SALTOs if you're participating in this event. The only thing is that we are transsectoral. So instead of working only with ESC or only with youth, we work with all sectors. That means we cover 54 agencies in 33 countries in 24 languages. And that means we tend to have a lot of requests. And again, we see a lot of diversity in the way NAs, national agencies, countries, different projects handle the green priority, and the difficulties they face with putting in place new changes, new practices, and new behaviors. And we see this particularly in the projects, because this is, I think, the biggest and most obvious way that the Erasmus Plus and ESC can foster the green transition is through all the mobility activities and projects. And you have our compendium of good projects on the right, but we try to figure out if there were projects from both programs that talked about climate justice and that explicitly were about climate justice. And we couldn't find any that really talked about this topic. But we also identified a lot of good practices that connect a lot with climate justice, and again, with the connection of the green priority and the inclusion and diversity priority. You can see some example here. This is not, we're not quoting specific projects, but this is good practices in terms of either the content of the activities or the way they're implemented that we feel is very relevant to encouraging young people to be more and more actors of the green transition. And again, not just being aware of this and seeing, decision being made for them. And there's a lot of talk about, again, turning the participants into trainers for their peers, into actors, trying to take those activities into like a pathway to citizenship, active citizenship, or even political engagement. And working with, again, this idea of actors of change within the program. And that's kind of, if you want to see the details of the project, you can refer to our compendium. But this is kind of examples of things that are happening and that either we can encourage or we can just give more visibility to in terms of fostering the climate justice. And to finish, a few questions, because you might have noticed throughout my presentation that there is no objective, explicit references to climate justice in the programs or even in the Green Deal. When you talk about just transition, it's fostering help for communities, but it's not necessarily even making those communities actors of the decisions. It's not, making sure that they included in the decision process. And so that might be a bit of what we're missing in the programs. That might be why this is very interesting to have conversations about this and see how we can do more for this, either, as I said, by making the things that are already happening more visible or keep exploring those topics. There's a few things that are not really included in the program, and I don't think they will be really including in the future. A big, I don't know, but I know that the conversation of the responsibility between different communities or different countries is very complicated to put in place within the program. There is this idea of fairness and total balance between the countries. We see this a lot with the idea of whether you're on an island or, in a country that is super connected by train, your expectations are the same. And it's very complicated right now. There is not a lot of push to have those kind of different rules, for example, and say, typically, if you live in Brussels, you have much more opportunities to take the train and do your mobility by train than if you live in, for example, Greece, where you're much more further away geographically and you have less access to infrastructures. We talk a lot about this, but there is no right now official push to consider this and to change, for example, the expectations or the support depending on the country or the community. There is also a lot of focus being put in the program on raising awareness, sharing knowledge, but there is not a lot of focus, at least not enough, in making sure that everybody has access to the green transition. And that's my second point. That's also, I think, a big problem. Well, not a big problem, but a big focus in the ecological movement. We tend to talk a lot about training people, about giving information to people, convincing people that climate change is real, convincing people that they can do something about it or that they should be doing something about it. But we don't often see the point of view of what is stopping people from taking part of the green transition. Is it really that they don't want to, that they don't care about, having vegetarian meals and taking the train? Or is it simply that they don't have access to quality food or they don't have access to actual infrastructure where they are? And this is something that I think we could all benefit for, at least within the program, we could benefit from to taking this point of view. And also something that is, for my two last points, is present in the program and is really present in the conversations that we have with people when we try to talk about the green transition and how we can foster it within the programs. People are much more aware of what it costs for us to not be inclusive. So that means less acceptability. If you try to impose something to a group of youth, for example, they're much less likely to do it compared to if you make the decision together, if you get them to decide, the type of activities that they want to do, the country that they want to visit, if you put them in charge of making programs. And that's something that we see a lot. And also we, at least in the youth and the ESC fields, people are much more aware of the vulnerability of some communities. And in those parts of the programs, there is a lot of focus on reaching out to communities that have been affected by weather event or trying to protect people with fewer opportunities from the impact of climate change. Of course, we could do much more and highlight many projects that try to do this. And also there is, I think, a lot of synergies between the inclusion and the green priority. The biggest one is that we are trying to push for change. We are asking the question of why are we doing this way? And isn't there a better way that we could do this? And I think the answer is always going to be better for inclusion and for green every time you question, again, the food that you're serving at every single meal, the way you meet people, the number of participants that attend this event and who they are. The question is going to be relevant for the green transition of like making sure people don't travel too much, that you have pertinent people in your event, that they have access to the resources to travel green. But again, every time you ask those questions, it's going to be also, I think, automatically more inclusive. Still have to work on it, but it's really something that work together. And there's also a lot of notions that make sense. The idea of the situation being very complicated, the idea that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. It's not like take the train. Whether you're in Iceland or Portugal or Greece, just take the train. Obviously, it doesn't work for all countries. And this is a common approach of like trying to understand where people are and how you can help them fit their needs, trying to understand what they want as well, on top of what they need. This idea of fitting every country, every community, every situation a bit differently. Same thing with the different sectors. You don't talk about green travel with students the way you talk about school sector mobilities when you have young children traveling in group. And the biggest part is that in both cases, what we're trying to achieve is a cultural change, a new normal in terms of the whole community, the whole culture. The idea is to green all the project and every aspect of the project. And I think this is the same thing for inclusion. And so this is only going to happen if we get everybody or almost everybody on board. And that means like, again, making sure that everybody is considered and everybody has their say and everybody can influence the way we do the green transition. Yeah, so I think that's about it for me. Thank you so much for this. I hope that was clear and bringing a few interesting points. Again, my main point is that there is not a lot of climate justice explicitly within the programs, but there is a lot of initiatives that connect to it. And we can really work toward making this more present and more visible. I think that's good for me, Tali.
Thank you, Ana Louise. Yes, very interesting. And it sounds like you're dealing with a lot of dilemmas there with pushing something on the agenda, but also wanting to empower participants to really get engaged. And this thing of there's no one size fits all is also got some applause in the from the group. That's also makes it very difficult to make policy, right? So it's good to hear that it's